Welcome to the Power Book of Podcasts. Unlock your potential with powerful book summaries that inspire personal growth and broaden your understanding of the world. Each week, we explore life-changing ideas, from leadership to mindset strategies to keys for happiness and success. Learn actionable insights to apply in your daily life. Join our growing community of thinkers and seekers. Like, comment, and hit that subscribe button now. It's time to supercharge your mind with the Power Book of Podcasts.
Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a story today, a pretty remarkable one.
Yeah, definitely remarkable.
The story of Henrietta Lacks. Now, we've got a whole stack of sources here. Biographical info, scientific papers, even court documents.
Wow, court documents.
We're going to try to piece together how this young woman from rural Virginia became, well, kind of an accidental scientific icon, I guess you could say.
It's a fascinating story for sure, especially when you consider the ethical questions surrounding her case.
Exactly. You see, Henrietta's cells, they were taken without her consent. And they became this fundamental tool in medical research. I mean, we're talking the polio vaccine, cancer research, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it's hard to overstate the impact her cells, known as HeLa cells, have had on science.
So today, our mission, should we choose to accept it,
I think we should,
is to uncover the story behind those immortal HeLa cells, but also, explore this intersection of scientific progress and patient rights, because it gets, well, a little messy.
It's a complex story, for sure. It really highlights how scientific breakthroughs are often intertwined with issues of race, access to healthcare, and just basic respect for individuals.
Yeah, and it's easy to get caught up in the wonder of scientific discovery and forget about the human side of things.
Absolutely, the human stories are crucial.
So let's start by grounding ourselves in Henrietta's life. Okay, picture this. A young Black woman in the 1930s growing up in rural Virginia, working those tobacco fields, finding joy in the juke joints of clover.
It's a world so far removed from the labs where her cells would end up making history.
Right. Such a contrast. And yet her seemingly ordinary life ends up having this extraordinary impact.
That contrast is what makes her story so compelling. Here she is, a mother of 5, deeply connected to her family, her community. Her life is filled with joy, love, and hardship, just like so many others. But then you have this extraordinary fate of her cells happening alongside it all.
And to really understand Henrietta, we have these accounts from her cousins, her friends. They describe this vibrant woman, someone who loved to dance, have fun. They talk about her famous rice pudding, a recipe that's still, enjoyed by her descendants today.
It's those details that bring her to life.
Yeah, but at the same time, her life was marked by the realities of that time, segregation, limited opportunities, and, a healthcare system where racism was just this, brutal reality.
It's important to understand that context.
Yeah.
Especially when we talk about Henrietta's diagnosis.
All right. So in 1951, she's diagnosed with cervical cancer at Johns Hopkins Hospital. And remember, this is a time when segregation is the norm. Treatment options are limited, and sadly, it was pretty common for doctors to use patients from public wards, often Black patients for research, without their knowledge or consent.
That practice was ethically questionable, even by the standards of the time.
Exactly. And that's where the story takes this turn that really impacts the rights you have as a patient today. So during a biopsy, Henrietta's cells are taken without her knowledge. And they're given to a researcher named Dr. George Gay.
Dr. Gay, he was brilliant, but also kind of obsessed with growing human cells outside the body. It was this feat that, no one had been able to achieve.
And can you imagine that happening today, having your cells taken without your knowledge, used for research?
It's unthinkable now, thanks in part to Henrietta's story.
And here's the thing. Henrietta's cells, they do what no other cells had done before. They didn't just survive, they thrived in the lab, multiplying like crazy.
They were essentially immortal, the first immortal human cell line. And they called them HeLa.
And this was huge, like a seismic event in science. Suddenly, scientists have access to these human cells that they can study, manipulate, reproduce endlessly.
It was a game changer. HeLa cells became a cornerstone of research, unlocking mysteries of life itself.
And the impact is just mind-boggling. I mean, trillions of these cells have been used in labs all over the world, right? Leading to breakthroughs in everything. The polio vaccine, cancer research. HeLa cells were even sent into space to study the effects of zero gravity.
It's amazing, isn't it? These cells from a woman who lived a relatively simple life ended up helping us understand the universe.
And the irony is, a woman who lived this ordinary life contributes to this scientific revolution, a revolution that largely benefited white society, while she and her family, like so many African Americans, continue to face inequality.
That's a really important point. The benefits of scientific progress haven't always been distributed equitably.
And here's the really unsettling part. Henrietta's family, they had no clue about any of this for decades. It wasn't until 1976, over 20 years after Henrietta's death, that they even find out the truth. And it's through a Rolling Stone article, of all things. Imagine finding out that your mother's cells are not only alive, but they're being bought, sold, used for groundbreaking research, all without her consent.
It's a story of shock, confusion, anger. The Lacks family was robbed of their mother's story, robbed of their own history in a way.
And it's not just the lack of consent. It's the fact that others profited from Henrietta's cells, without any benefit to the family. Henrietta's daughter, Deborah, she becomes consumed by this need to understand her mother's legacy.
Deborah's journey is incredibly moving. She fought to learn about her mother, about HeLa, about the science that had been built upon her mother's cells.
It's a story we'll delve into more in the next part of our deep dive, but it raises these big questions, right? About the ethics of it all, about patient rights, because this isn't just history, it's about your rights, the potential of your cells, and the ethical dilemmas we face as a society.
Exactly. Stay tuned because we're just getting started.
We'll be right back.
So we were talking about, the Lacks family finding out about HeLa. And as we sort of dig deeper into those ethical questions, it's important to remember that research back then, it was a different world.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, the whole idea of informed consent, like we know it today, it was barely even a thing back then.
Exactly. And that makes, some of the things that researchers did back then even more unsettling.
Oh, absolutely. Like, take Dr. Chester Southam, prominent cancer researcher in the 50s. He was injecting live cancer cells, including HeLa, into patients. And get this, without their consent.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that actually happened. He claimed he was, testing their immune systems, but still.
Injecting cancer cells. I mean, talk about a violation of patient rights.
It was. Even by the standards of the time, it caused a huge uproar.
Well, yeah, I can imagine. So what happened? Did anyone try to stop him?
Yeah, actually, there were these 3 young Jewish doctors. They flat out refused to participate in his experiments. They even compared it to, the Nazi experiments. They knew firsthand the horrors that could come from that kind of disregard for human life.
Wow, that's intense. They must have been under a lot of pressure to just go along with it.
They were, putting their careers on the line to do what they thought was right.
They were incredibly brave. And you know what? Their courage, it really helped expose Southam's practices. And it sparked a national debate about informed consent.
Absolutely. That case, along with Henrietta's story, it really fueled the movement that protects your rights as a patient today.
It's kind of amazing, right? Like this bittersweet legacy. Henrietta's cells, taken without consent, they actually help lead to these huge changes in how we think about patient rights and research ethics.
It's a ripple effect that started with one woman's cells.
Yeah.
And it's still shaping the landscape of medical research today.
Okay, so we've talked about the ethical side, the dark side, but let's shift gears a little. Talk about some of the good that came from HeLa, the scientific breakthroughs. And it wasn't just the polio vaccine, right?
Oh, no, not at all. HeLa cells allowed scientists to make huge strides in all sorts of areas, understanding cell division, how viruses replicate, even the aging process.
So, we're talking major advancements in medicine here.
Absolutely. I mean, think of your cells like these tiny little factories. Each one holds your genetic blueprint. HeLa cells, they became those factories for the world, producing knowledge that changed everything.
Wow. So, what specifically?
Well, they helped develop chemotherapy, cloning, gene mapping, in vitro fertilization. I could go on and on. The list is incredibly long.
Okay, so it wasn't all bad. There were definite positives, but, it's still hard to wrap my head around the scale of it all.
It is mind-boggling. And, it even gets more sci-fi. They sent HeLa cells into space to study the effects of zero gravity. And then there's the human-animal hybrids we touched on earlier.
Wait, human-animal hybrids?
Yeah, it sounds crazy, right?
Yeah.
But those experiments, they were groundbreaking. They fused HeLa cells with mouse cells, created these hybrid cells with DNA from both species. It allowed scientists to study how genes work and interact in ways that were never possible before.
Okay, I gotta admit, that's pretty wild. But also kind of ethically, blurry,
Oh, definitely. And you're right. Those kinds of experiments, they wouldn't happen today without a ton of ethical scrutiny.
Which shows how much things have changed, right? We've learned from the past.
We have. The scientific community recognizes the need for ethical guidelines, respect for the individuals involved in research, whether they're, living patients or those who've donated tissues.
So we've come a long way, but are there still unresolved issues?
Oh, absolutely. Especially when it comes to the commercialization of human tissues. I mean, Henrietta's cells have generated billions of dollars for companies and institutions, yet her family, they never saw a dime.
Right, that's the big moral dilemma at the heart of all this. Is it right for someone to profit from another person's cells, especially when those cells were taken without consent? I mean, how do you even begin to answer that?
It's tough. There are valid points on both sides. Some argue that profiting from human tissues, it encourages research, right? Leads to new treatments, cures that benefit everyone. But others, they see it as exploitation, especially when the donor and their family, they don't see any of the benefit.
This is a tough question, and it all boils down to, ownership and control. Should individuals have property rights over their tissues? Should you get to decide how your cells are used, whether it's for research or for profit?
Those are questions a lot of people are grappling with. Some people are pushing for stricter regulations, around tissue ownership, informed consent. Imagine a future where you have more control over how your tissues are used.
Yeah, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, and some are proposing the creation of nonprofit biobanks. So any profits from tissue research get reinvested back into science and healthcare for the benefit of everyone.
Those are some interesting ideas. But I think, the biggest challenge is changing the culture of science itself. Moving away from that mindset that human tissues are just raw materials for research. We need to remember there are human stories behind those cells. Recognize the contributions of the individuals, especially those who are often overlooked, and make sure that the benefits of scientific progress reach everyone.
Yeah, you're right. It's about finding a balance.
Exactly. A balance between scientific curiosity and ethical responsibility.
Between the pursuit of knowledge and respect for human dignity.
And that brings us back to Henrietta Lacks. Her story is this powerful reminder that we need both. Her cells, taken without consent, they changed the world, no doubt. Helped us understand life, fight disease, push the boundaries of what's possible.
It's an incredible legacy.
But it's also a cautionary tale. We have to learn from it. Make sure that her legacy is one of both scientific advancement and ethical awareness.
We can't forget the human side of science.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. What does Henrietta Lacks' story mean to you? How does it change the way you think about science, about ethics, about what it means to be human? It's wild to think about just how many of Henrietta's cells are out there now. Like, scientists estimate there are trillions more of her cells growing in labs than there ever were in her body.
Yeah.
Trillions.
Trillions, yeah. It's a number that's hard to even, grasp. More than the stars in our galaxy. It's like cellular immortality, right?
Yeah.
Your cells just keep replicating and spreading.
It's kind of sci-fi concept when you think about it. But with all those cells out there, do we lose sight of the person behind them? What do you think Henrietta would make of all this? Her cells everywhere. It's
a question that comes up a lot with this story. And it raises another interesting point. Are HeLa cells even still considered human? I mean, they've been replicating for decades. Their DNA has mutated. They're different now, genetically, from Henrietta's original cells.
So are they still, a part of her? Or have they become something else entirely? It's evolution in a petri dish. Speaking of which, you mentioned those human-animal hybrids earlier, the ones created using HeLa cells.
Right, those experiments were really groundbreaking. But yeah, ethically controversial, for sure. They fused HeLa cells with mouse cells, creating these hybrid cells with DNA from both species, blurring the lines between human and animal, at a cellular level.
That's kind of freaky. But also, scientifically amazing. It makes you wonder, about where science is headed. What are the limits?
It definitely pushes the boundaries. And you're right, those kinds of experiments, they wouldn't be done today without some serious ethical debate.
Which is a good thing, right? It shows how much we've learned. We're more aware now of the potential consequences.
Definitely. The scientific community has come a long way in terms of research oversight and regulations. But there are still issues, that we haven't fully figured out. Especially when you talk about the commercialization of human tissues. Henrietta's cells, they've made billions of dollars for companies and institutions. But her family, they haven't seen a dime of it.
And that's the big ethical question that just hangs over this whole story. Is it right to profit from someone else's cells? Especially when those cells were taken without consent. It's where do you draw the line?
It's tough. Some people argue that those profits, they fuel research, right? Lead to new treatments that benefit everyone. But others say it's just plain exploitation. Especially when the donor and their family, they don't see any of the benefits.
Right. And it goes back to that question of ownership and control. Should people have property rights over their tissues? Should you be able to say how your cells are used, whether it's for research or for profit?
Yeah, those are big questions. And they're not easy to answer. Some people think we need stricter regulations. Like, imagine a world where you have more control over how your tissues are used. And if someone's going to profit from them, you get a share.
That sounds pretty fair to me.
Right. And some are even talking about setting up nonprofit biobanks. So the profits go back into research, healthcare, for everyone's benefit.
Those are some interesting solutions, but I think, even more than that, we need a culture shift. Science can't just view human tissues as raw materials. We got to remember that there are human stories behind those cells, real people who made those discoveries possible. And we have to make sure that the benefits of those discoveries, they reach everyone.
I think that's a great point. It's about recognizing the human side of science.
Right. And that's really what Henrietta Lacks' story is all about. It's this incredible journey full of scientific marvels, ethical dilemmas, and ultimately a call for greater awareness. Her cells, taken without her consent, changed the world in ways no one could have predicted. But they also serve as a powerful reminder of the responsibility we have as a society to make sure scientific progress goes hand in hand with respect, fairness, and a commitment to the well-being of all people. And that's where we'll leave it for today.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the remarkable story of Henrietta Lacks. It's a story that challenges us to think deeply about the intersection of science, ethics, and what it truly means to be human.